better. And then, that then appears here.
Yeah.
See that?
Yeah.
We'll press pause. Okay.
Responsive. But yeah, I get it.
That's
Stop
better.
it and
We don't want to stop, I want to pause it. Come on, you. Excuse me. Perfect, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so sorry for the very slightly late start. For those of you who've come in to Oxford yourselves, you'll know that the... Come on here, sorry. You'll know that the traffic has been an absolute killer today, so it's really problematic. Thank you so much to all the people who've come in person. Nicholas, can we do the one in the middle? That's the one. It should go down now.
It's already the lowest it can be.
No, it should be lower, I think.
The corner one's
I know, we're getting light off something else. Yeah, got it. Okay, that's the lowest it can be. Perfect. Yes, I'm sorry for the delay. We're still going to get out at the normal time, so we'll be breaking for our little intermission a little bit earlier, a little bit later than usual. If anybody in the room does need to run to catch a bus, just to warn you, the security guard is going to be doing his rounds from just after 8 p.m. round to about 8:45 when we're starting to leave properly. So just be aware, either get out before 8 or wait for the whole thing. I won't bang on about lots to do with the cafe. I think most people who are either online or in the room know how this works. For those online, please feel free to put things in the chat, comments or questions, anytime, including now. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Stephen Sandler, who has actually come all the way from London today in huge, horrendous traffic, including sitting on the M40 for far too long, so I'm terribly grateful to him. He is a qualified osteopath, and he also pursued a research doctorate in things relating to what he's going to talk about tonight. So he's looking at the effect of sex hormones on the musculoskeletal system of the body, but also that has led him into some other conclusions which he wants to talk about. So, thank you very much for coming, and you've got your own microphone, so I'll leave you to it.
Thank you very much. What a delight to come to Oxford, apart from the traffic. It's got to be one of the prettiest places, isn't it? As Rachel said, I'm an osteopath by trade. I graduated back in 1975. Spent 40 years in practice and in teaching at the British School of Osteopathy, which is now the University College of Osteopathy, and that's in central London. And then I decided to leave before I was the little fella sort of sitting at the front door that they polished as they went past. You know, students can relate to the generation above them and maybe the generation above that. If you've been going for 40 odd years, so I quit. I do lots of postgraduate teaching all over the place, and I'm fortunate in that I've been able to teach in 22 different countries because my speciality within osteopathy is very special. It's very quite isolated, and it came about because of an interest. And I'm sure you'll agree, from a science point of view, if you're interested in something and you follow that pursuit, not only is your life good, but at the end of it, I remember when I did my Vaba Voce for my PhD, and this professor said, "Do you know what you've done?" And I said, "No, sir." "What have I done?" He said, "You've proved something." He said, "People go through their lives and never prove anything." He said, "But you didn't know the answer to a question, and now you do." I said, "Oh, right." He said, "Have you thought about postdoctorates?" I said, "No." I just wanted to ask and answer a question. So, whoops, let's go. Okay. Two main sex hormones, so the normal functioning of each gender, and for women, estrogen, for men, testosterone. I'm sorry, my slide picks up Americanisms. My computer's schizophrenic. Sometimes it will say it with an O, and sometimes it won't. Both hormones play a very important role in each gender, and certainly estradiol is the main form of estrogen, surprisingly has got many functions in men's day-to-day health. And when you talk to people about estrogen, they forget about men. They forget that males have this produced from the adrenal gland, and women have testosterone the same way. And so we tend to go divergent. Medicine is very vertical in what it does. You would go to see your gynecologist, but if you've got a liver dysfunction, he wouldn't know how to deal with it. He would send you to a liver specialist. And if you went to the liver specialist with a liver problem, but you had an aching hip, he would send you to an orthopedist or a rheumatologist. In fact, rheumatology is the one branch of medicine that is horizontal, because it tracks all the way across, because it deals a lot of the time with connective tissue diseases and inflammatory states. So, estrogen works with men, and testosterone works with women. Good. Hormones represent what makes females different from males. Generally, females and males have got the same hormones, but the production sites, the blood concentrations, and the interactions with different organ systems is totally different in the two genders. I put this there because it's just a bit of quick revision. Everything happens up here in the hypothalamus. You've got the anterior posterior part of the pituitary gland, and there's a feedback system. So when levels of two particular hormones, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, go low, that's picked up by the hypothalamus, which turns on the valve, and then the precursors come in, and more gets thrown. When the levels get too high, it turns it off, and everything goes back down again. These two hormones, luteinizing and follicle stimulating, are part of the normal cycle, and in males they're going to affect the testes and eventually produce testosterone, and in the females they're going to affect the ovary and eventually the estrogens, and they're responsible in the male for spermatogenesis and for the main sex characteristics, and in the female likewise for secondary characteristics and for the estrogenesis and the genesis of the ovary itself. So, why should I, as an osteopath, be remotely interested in this? Because it's the nature of my brain, I'm afraid. If I don't know the answer to something, I can't go to sleep. And, you know, we avoid quiz shows on the TV in the evening because I'd have to go back to the computer and look up the answers if I didn't know. That's just my quirk. I noticed that many women get to spend their husband's pension pot because he dies in his 40s and 50s and she dies in her 50s and 60s. And that's a fact. You will spend his pension pot, ladies, if he's got one. And it's because of the effects of the sex hormones which have a protective effect. Now, the sex hormones we're talking about are estrogen, and they have a lipid-lowering effect. They also have an effect on blood vessels, whereby blood vessels are expanding. So therefore, she's not going to get the strokes, the thrombotic effects, whereas he hasn't got that protection, and therefore he gets the strokes and the heart attacks, etc. You all know the maxim, women go pear-shaped, men go apple-shaped. You know, when you get to your 40s and your 50s, it all goes around here, and all of that is basically visceral fat, and that's where the danger lies. Statistically, women have their heart attacks 10 years later. But also, during my period of the PhD research, which was on the effects of circulating female hormones on collagen, the actual structure of life, if you think about the bony skeleton that everything hangs on, That's fine, we can understand that. But collagen actually gives us a total, complete framework, enclosing everything, giving everything shape, form. Not just a muscle going into a bone to provide an anchor, but if you actually dissect a muscle, it looks that shape. Why is it that shape? Because it's held in that shape by collagen. So collagen is a really, really, really important structure. And I noticed, I remember very clearly, there was one particular woman, and she was an athlete, and she was training to be a shot putter, and she was a candidate for a potential Olympic team. But she kept on breaking down, and she kept on hurting herself, and nobody could understand why she was hurting herself. And I started treating her, and I was the first person to say, can you correlate where you were in your menstrual cycle with your athletic injury? And she said, why do you want to know that? And I said, well, that's interesting, isn't it? And she said, I'll look at the diary. And she went through her diary, and she said, it's mid-cycle. I said, maybe that's interesting. And I just put that question over there, come back to it later. But then, every woman that I continued to see, I would say to her, where are you in your cycle today? When did you hurt yourself? Trying to find that correlation. And the correlation came back more and more. So I sent out 1,000 questionnaires to my colleagues all over the country and said, I want you to ask your patients, and bingo, it came back 87% positive. Goodness gracious, I've fallen on something here. So we found that something was changing, and as these were female, the guys didn't have any correlation at all. They hurt themselves all the time. But the ladies, they did. And the ligaments and the muscles changed during parts of the cycle. One of the things that I was doing was I was taking blood samples and correlating that blood samples with measurements at the index finger. We had a little machine that we rigged up, and that became looser and looser, okay, as she went through her cycle. So, first part of the cycle, not much change, but as soon as estrogen had dropped after ovulation, the finger started to go up, increasing in range. And we were able to look at the bloods and say whether it was estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, which was the hormone that was taking place. So it was quite an exciting bit of research to do. But I wasn't alone in looking at what estrogen was doing outside of the gynae system. There were loads of people doing it, but they weren't talking to each other. So this research group in Milan was producing some very nice results, and research group in Cambridge were also producing nice results, but if only they spoke to each other, they'd get the big picture. Just to give you an example, just in preparation for today, I did a PubMed search, sorry, let's go back a bit. Just looking at a simple estrogens and the cardiovascular system. 9,304 results. Estrogen and the muscular system, 12,120 results. Estrogen on bone density, 6,323 results. So a lot of people are researching and looking at the extragenital effects of estrogen. If we look at the cardiovascular system, this was where I initially became excited, because I was saying that these women were surviving and the blokes weren't. And studies have shown that perimenopausal females have got much less cardiovascular disease when age matched to males. So the information's there. the lower incidence is attributed to estrogen. The receptors alpha and beta and various gene-protein complexes, having genomic and non-genomic actions, put this as the genetic effect of estrogens. So the estrogens are capable of actually changing things at the level of the genes. Estrogen E2 has got a protective effect on the cardiac and blood vessels, fibrosis, angiogenesis, vascular function, cholesterol lowering, and finally thromboembolic effects. So estrogen is really working hard to keep you alive. Unfortunately, we haven't got it. And if anything, our testosterone is doing the opposite. That's maybe why it's called Mother Nature. I don't know. Males don't get the benefits, and males die younger. And that's a very complex statement, and I'm quite happy to say, look, you know, it isn't really all that you say. And there's a lot happening here other than what I've just mentioned, but these are big statements, and there's just a couple of references that I've thrown in there because they're worth looking at. The skeleton. Now, we all know about the effects of osteoporosis and sunlight and all the rest of it. So sunshine on the skin produces 7-dehydrocholesterol. That, through cholecalciferol, vitamin D, comes into the liver. Together with the dietary intake, you're going to get down to 25-hydroxyvitamin D3, and that, through the kidney, maintains calcium in the body. So it's a simple mechanism whereby we need calcium. If we don't get it just from the diet, we can get it from sunlight as well. And they say anybody who lives south of Warwickshire is pretty safe. Anybody who lives north of Manchester, really you should get your clothes off and go walking in the sun a bit more. Just from that point of view. But the low levels of vitamin D can lead to lower estrogen levels, because without vitamin D you can't absorb estrogen without estrogen you can't absorb vitamin D from your gut. So you can eat as much vitamin D as you like, but if your estrogens are too low, you can't absorb it. It just goes straight through. So we now look at the sort of symptoms, if you like, of low estrogen levels. Mood swings, headaches, depression, hot flashes, all around the menopause. My wife one day woke up and I said, "Are you all right?" She said, "No." She said, "I'm just knackered, I'm exhausted, and I've just got out of bed." So I said, "Right." She said, "I don't know, something's not right. And I think I'm going to see what the doctor's got to say." And I said, "Well, yeah, you should, because look, these are your symptoms that I've been noting." And what was happening with her? Dry hair, which was falling out, chronically constipated, mood swings. It's just not my wife. She's just not the person to have mood swings. She's angry or she's happy, but she doesn't do two in the same day. And there are all sorts of other things. And I said, "By the way, whilst you're about it, can you say to the doctor, can you check my thyroid gland?" And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because a notorious error at GP level is they're not looking for the thyroid. And most women who go from normal to underactive thyroid are doing so around about the menopause. And the symptoms look the same." All right. So she went to the doctor and he said, Pamela, come on. You're an intelligent woman. It's your menopause. That's what it is. She said, "Yeah, but Steve said, would you mind checking my thyroid gland?" "Oh, Steve said, let's check your thyroid gland." "Oh, I see. Well, tell your husband to keep on fixing backs, which he does very, very well. And I'll do the medicine." "All right." She said, "No, you tell him." So All right, okay. Sent her off for the blood test. Female hormones, thyroxine. 7 o'clock in the morning, 3 days later, the phone rings. Now, if the phone rings at 7 o'clock in the morning, who died? Hello, is that Pamela? Yes. It's Richard here, your doctor. Yes, Richard. I want to see you in the surgery this morning. Your thyroid has virtually stopped. Has it? I see, so I need some thyroxine. Yes, yes, you do, and it's very important that you start taking it straight away. She said, what about the HRT that you were proposing? Oh, you can have that as well. And she said, hold on a moment, I think you need to apologise to my husband. Oh, hello, Steve. He said, Richard here. He said, I dropped one, didn't I? So I said, yep. And he said, never mind about all that. He said, just make sure she comes in and gets the pills. I said, okay. And she went in and she got her prescription. Went to the pharmacy and said, don't bother with the HRT. I'm not really interested. I will deal with that in my own way with natural methods. And I said to her when she came home, was that wise? She said, I'm going to take the thyroxine. Then I'll feel better. She said, but this change of life will change my life. And she started exercising for the first time in her life. She was playing tennis 3 times a week. She was completely different in terms of what she was doing and didn't need the HRT. But since then, she's taken thyroxine every day, and she's one of the most healthy, active 70-year-olds that I know. But it's all about these hormones and what was actually happening. She wasn't deficient in vitamin D because the bone scans all said, no, she's fine. However, we're very concerned about your estrogen levels. And she said, well, let's get the thyroxine back up again, because that will perk up any estrogen that's knocking about and see what happens. And of course, what happened? She went back 4 months later, had another scan, had more bloods done, and they said, oh, your estrogens are nicely up now. Isn't it interesting? What have you been doing? She said, exercising. So that was sort of quite a nice thing. Males, also quite important, vitamin D. Big, strong bones, healthy immune systems, the inflammatory response. That's important, more important in men than in women for some reason. But all very important with vitamin D benefits. Vitamin D keeps testosterone levels at a certain peak point. So sperm production and building strong muscles all goes in with vitamin D. But the vitamin D, just to repeat myself, if that's low, you don't have the estrogen. And so therefore, this is a double whammy that's coming in. And if it's excess estrogen, if your testosterones are waning, that gives you the smooth skin, the gynecomastia, the big apple shape around here, because your testosterone levels aren't working efficiently at that point. So, bone mineral density, again, an outcome of vitamin deficiency. Estrogen supplementation does improve bone mineral density, but there's a price to be paid. Estrogen-led tumours. Yeah? Uterus, breast, cervix, ovary. If you stimulate these beyond the point where nature says, okay, we can start to tail off, then the incidence of these tumours begins to rise. And every woman, when she is being considered for HRT, is always asked about her family history of these tumours. And so she should. But cortisol and other markers of inflammation also play a role in bone mineral density reduction. But much more research needs to be done in this area. I think cortisol and the inflammatory markers, because I think that's been missed out because people got too excited about estrogens. And so we now need to redress the balance and bring things back into the centre a little bit more. Muscle strength. This is very, very interesting. The recent Ladies World Cup. In one match, 2 players went off the field with cruciate ligament injuries. There's no way of proving it, but I'll bet you any money you like they were both ovulating. Absolutely certain. And when I published my stuff back in early 2000s, I wrote to all of the golf, sports, athletics, etc., and said, look, here's my research. Women hurt themselves in relation to phases of the menstrual cycle. So if they stop training at a certain point, they won't have to take time off because of injury. Every single man Jack wrote back and said, so what? As far as we're concerned, we'll put them all on the pill and they can train and they won't hurt themselves anyway. If you think, one person said, if you think it takes 4 years plus to train for the next Olympics, you think I'm going to give them 3 and 4 days off a month, you're wrong. And I said, okay, you can lead the horse to water. But if we look at gender performance and competition, just this week there's an athletic body in India and they pulled a girl off the track just before she was due to compete. Okay? She was one of the fastest runners, one of the strongest athletes, and they looked at her and said, you've got far too much androgen in your blood. You know, we are saying there's a gender identity issue here and you're not competing. And her response was, I've got all the equipment, so I'm a woman. And they said, well, you might think so. A really horrific event. There's been 2 or 3 cases like this. But some female athletes, because they, for whatever reason, do have a high level of testosterone, are going to perform like men. Their muscle strength will change. Their muscle bulk will change. And they're not taking a drug to do it, it's within them. So the argument is going to have to be answered as to whether or not it's the intention or the non-intention, in which case, you know, maybe all athletes that have certain characteristics, regardless of their estrogen and androgen component, are going to be shot putters and the others are going to be doing this. If you think about swimmers, how many black swimmers internationally have won gold medals? How many black swimmers internationally? None. They don't swim at that level. 100 metres, 200 metres, 220. Yeah, they're the sprinters because their muscles, their rhabdomyosin, is different to the white guys. The white guys are the middle distance runners, the Seb Coes. Okay? The longer distance runners, by and large, are all East African. Why? Because they're training at altitude. There was a guy many moons ago called Lassie Viren. Lassie Viren was competing, I think, it was in the 70s. But anyway, he was a medical student. And he looked at this and didn't say anything to too many people. But 2 weeks before an event, he took a litre of his own blood, okay, ran it through an oxygen circulator, and really beefed up the red cell volume, and the red cells that were there had very strong oxygen concentrations. And then the night before he was due to run, he put it back. Right? He beat all comers at every level, and nobody had ever heard of him. And people were screaming, it's cheating, it's cheating. Well, now that's forbidden. It's called blood doping. And what they do, what this guy had, instead of 8 litres of blood, right, took one away And in the 2 weeks, it made its way back up again, added the extra supercharged litre, and ran faster than Superman. And he's now the Minister of Health in Norway. But that's just, tinkering with the hormones. So one thing that I found in my research was about muscle strength. And that's just a paper about, which is just very current, where do trans individuals fit into sports and athletics based on current research. So it's being looked at, you can bet your life. Muscle strength, okay. Studies demonstrate that anaerobic capacity and muscle strength are greatest during the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle. So you have the menstrual phase, followed by the follicular phase. In the follicular phase, from day 4 up to day 12, the uterine lining is thickening, the ovaries are producing more and more oocytes, and it gets all the way up to day 12. And at day 12, something happens. Okay? All these little eggs are all lined up, ready for the race. Okay? When a baby is born, she's already lost 40% of her eggs on the day she's born. But that's okay, you only need 2.2. So all these eggs are lined up, estrogen starts coming in. As estrogen starts to rise, the eggs start to grow. There's a winner, that's the ovulating egg. All right? Now, as soon as that happens, estrogen rises, drops from 0 to 0 overnight. If that drop didn't occur, luteinizing hormone from the pituitary gland wouldn't appear, and it's luteinizing hormone which makes the egg ovulate. So if you just take the contraceptive pill and keep your estrogen levels high throughout the month, you never ovulate, you never conceive. That was the theory behind that. But what's happening is that's also correlating with muscle strength. And if you just took simple measurements with a dumbbell and just worked your biceps until the biceps just literally can't carry on, it's exhausted. As you approach ovulation, you can repeat that 30, 40, 50, 60 times, no problem. As soon as you've ovulated, back to about 10, and then it's knackered again, and then it builds up towards the end. So that was the basis of that research. So the anaerobic capacity and strength are greatest during that follicular phase, okay, when estrogen levels start to peak. Studies demonstrate that the capacity and the strength are greatest during that phase. Oh, that's a nice double statement there. So the possibility is that the physiological capabilities of skeletal muscle to adapt to exercise training are dependent on the cycle and can be important for female attitudes when they're optimizing training. My PhD showed that the injuries were also related to the cycle, which was a big surprise. Athletic performance, I've mentioned that. Gender, I mentioned that. So these questions are being asked. Are these winners of female races females with naturally occurring high androgens? So is it normal or unfair for female athletes to be competing against them? Very interesting questions. Okay, if we look here, there's the follicular phase, there's the luteal phase. So, follicle stimulating hormone, which comes from the pituitary gland, it does what it says on the tin. It stimulates the follicle. The follicle is the space within the ovary where the egg is starting to grow. About normally 20 or 30 at the beginning of a cycle, one eventually pops through. So this is the luteal phase, and in the luteal phase, that's when the uterus is really getting thick and ready for the implanted fertilized ovum. And if we look at the hormones, we can see that estrogen goes all the way up and then bang, drops. And here we've got luteinizing hormone, and that's called the luteinizing spike. And if you didn't have a drop of estrogen, you wouldn't get the luteinizing spike. Progesterone, that's really the second half of the cycle, the luteal phase. Progesterone is the pregnancy hormone. It's the hormone that prepares you to actually receive the fertilized ovum. And that comes from the corpus luteum of the ovary, and that changes as it carries on. But if we look at the previous statements that I made, we can see that as estrogen rises, so does muscle strength, and it does. The research is out there. Long people were doing this before me. The stronger you want to be, okay, if you can check your cycle and know what's happening within your cycle, okay, then you can actually train better in that first half of the cycle. People often say, yeah, well, what about, if you've only got a 21-day cycle, or if you've got a 33-day cycle? Not a problem. Cast in stone, day 14 onwards, okay? Once you have ovulated, 14 days later, you will menstruate unless you're pregnant. Whereas the front end of the cycle is the variable bit, okay? So if you're not sure where you are in the cycle, okay, count backwards from your previous menstruation, okay, and work it from there. Or you can use an ovulation predictor. It's just a little thing that you can buy in Boots, and that will tell you when you've ovulated. Because the second half of the cycle is about injuries. So, if she carries on with strength training, she's now trying to increase performance, but she's got low levels of estrogen. And estrogen, as I said, affects muscle strength. So what it also does is it protects you from injury. So if in the second part of the cycle you're gallivanting around and really trying to increase the strength, etc., of what's happening, because estrogen isn't there to protect you, you're going to hurt yourself. And that's why I said about those girls who were playing international soccer. So it's really very important. It's very important for women generally. Forget athletic performance. If you're going to clean the house, do it any time, but not between days 12 and day 15. Okay? Some say that this cleaning the house is really nest building. It's actually clearing out, ready for the baby that's going to be arriving. That's a psychiatrist's, our psychologist's milieu, and it isn't mine. But I think what's very important, things like doing the gardening. You're going to go out there, it's a nice spring day, I'm going to go and turn over all the borders, mow the lawn, spend a good 7 hours in the garden, come in, what's the matter? Nothing, I had a lovely day. If you're going to go to the gym, just your routine exercises. Don't do your marathon training, in that ovulatory phase. But get your first half of the cycle. Other problems with estrogen outside of the gynae system. Skin becomes thin, atrophic, and breaks down quite easily. So again, hair, that's related to skin. Every day is a bad hair day when your estrogens are low. Cardiovascular system, we've already talked about that. Androgens, regulation of the hair cycle. So this is what we call male pattern baldness, but it's male pattern baldness in women. And female pattern loss, alopecia, all associated with the perimenopause and the postmenopausal states. But it is actually also associated with younger women. the migraine brain. This is really interesting. The brain responds differently to environmental and internal signals that relate to the state of development of the nervous system. So when the child is being formed in the womb, it's estrogens which are promoting how that brain will develop. While genetic and epigenetic factors contribute towards our understanding of the pathogenesis of migraine, hormone fluctuations will alter the set point. Very commonly when I'm treating patients with migraine, I will say, is there any relation between migraine and your menstrual cycle? Don't know, have you thought about it? Have you got a headache today? No, but I'm going to get one tomorrow. Whereabouts are you in your cycle? Oh, that's interesting, yes, it'll probably start tomorrow. And when somebody points it out, it's very obvious. But what's that got to do with that? It's not necessarily so obvious to someone who hasn't got a science background or a training or a thought linking A to B. Cyclic surges of these hormones affect glial cells, astrocyte functions, neuronal functions, the way we think, the way our emotions work, the way we have cognitive disturbance at some stages within a menstrual cycle. I mean, it's been known for years that a clever gynecologist can actually get a sentence of murder reduced to manslaughter by saying that the premenstrual effects were the things that altered brain and cognitive function, and she wasn't, quote, in control, unquote, at that point. That's been used very successfully and quite rightly for many, many years. And again, I haven't seen, sort of looked for them, but I'm sure if you follow the work of Katharina Dalton, she was the pioneer in this, and she was the one that actually compiled lists of when serious assaults and murders occurred and tried to correlate that within menstrual cycles. Estrogen is mainly excitatory, progesterone, inhibitory on brain neural systems, which is maybe why so frequent women have migraines in the premenstrual phase, because it's the premenstrual phase which is the progesterone phase, as we saw on the chart before. Brain function, again, moods, well documented. Estrogen receptors are concentrated deeply in the structures of brain that control emotional and cognitive function. Subcortical regions such as the hippocampus for memory and the amygdala for emotions, as well as several cortical regions. This is where you will go looking and you will find E2 receptors. Nothing occurs in the body wastefully. If those receptors are there, it's because they're controlling and they're looking something. You start altering the amount of estrogen that there is available, and those receptors won't pick it up, which means therefore that what those receptors are controlling in terms of function will start to fail. Dopamine receptors, okay, again, serotogenic transmissions. These are very important in diseases like Parkinson's. And who would think about estrogen and Parkinson's in the same breath? Because the Parkinson's people are talking about the medications that they use, and the gynecologists are talking about medications that they use, but it's the switchover, the crossover, which I think is interesting. There you are. Estrogens appear to have a protective effect on neurodegenerative disorders, Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. That's a reference in there. So Alzheimer's, people are, but hang on, Alzheimer's, that's old ladies. You know, why are we looking at that? This is old people. Estrogens are in young people. Yeah, And if estrogen starts to fail in your 30s and you go through a menopause at 36, 38, is there a correlation that says that your Alzheimer's will come on that much earlier? Which is very exciting. I think that's really, really interesting. So just in summary, the role of the sex hormones outside of the genital system is vast, multifunctional, widespread effects, and through breast, liver, the uterus, yeah, we're all expecting that, but then skin, cardiovascular system, brain function, it's all more. I've actually tidied this slide up, so what I do is I'll send you a copy of the tidied up version of this. I just thought I'd put this in at the end because it's really quite interesting. For me as an osteopath, not only does the level of extragenital estrogen have an effect on muscle strength and all the rest of it, but I know that the technique that I use is going to change depending on where she is in her menstrual cycle. I'll use a technique which is less direct, less challenging, so that there's no bad reaction to the treatment that I gave. You know, osteopaths, one of the things that we're very famous for is manipulating the spine or wherever else. There are certain techniques which are, for example, if I had a 20-stone rugby player, I would have to use a much stronger, much firmer, much harder technique than on a 16-year-old girl. So my technique changes according to the morphology and the body usage of the patient. But now my technique is changing, and my teaching, when I teach students, is that you've got to use the softer techniques, especially around ovulation and especially around the end of the cycle, day 23, day 24. Okay, because that's when she'll come back afterwards and say, oh, I felt much better after your treatment last time, but it took 2 days before the pain wore off. And you just got to rein things back. So for my profession, you know, we're very strong about safety and differential diagnosis and making sure we're doing the right thing at the right time to our patients, but also there's this idea that says, go and look at the effects of the hormones and you'll be better at doing what you're trying to do if you use a different sort of technique. So I think that's got it. Thank you very much.
Just sitting somebody's foot. Don't do that often. Can you put the recording on pause? People in the room, we are only going to take a couple of minutes. Okay, I've just turned our recording back on for the discussion part. So we're on a very tight schedule. Simon, thank you. Yes, please. Is that okay?
Rachel, do you want me to unpause the recording?
I've just done it. We're all good. Should be working. You okay?
Yeah.
I'm just going to leave that at the top there. Right. So, thank you very much. There's some comments, some questions on the chat, but also there may be some for people in the room. I'm going to dive into the chat first, give you guys time to think. So there are some, I just want to say at this point that there are several people going, you haven't got it quite right about HRT and things have been changing a lot recently. But I think I want to go into questions about what you were saying about the specific effects. So I want to pick up a couple of those. One person's asking, should women, in your opinion, who are over 70 be put on HRT to maintain estrogen levels, to maintain bone density, or are there potential risks of stroke or breast cancer if they do that?
Okay. Well, the answer to that question is that I'm not qualified to give that advice. My doctorate is a PhD as a science level. I'm not a medical doctor. But if I was suspicious, then I would write back to the GP and have a discussion. But it is one of the risk factors when prescribing HRT for the first time, to see where these estrogen-producing tumours are going to be, and if there's a family history, and if there's a genetic predisposition and all the rest of it. But it's not for me to make that decision.
Thank you very much. So I also wanted to pick up that people are also asking, again, this is kind of based on what you found out in your research, what would you suggest the effect of taking a contraceptive pill, perhaps by athletes, might be either the combined version of progesterone only to affect probability of injury, so going on about your idea?
Progesterone only isn't part of the argument because it doesn't have the same effects as estrogen. As far as the athletic authorities were concerned, when I brought it to their attention that this was a phase where women were hurting themselves, they simply said they'll all go on the pill. And then there won't be any estrogen drop, there won't be any ovulation, and there won't be any break in training.
Have you followed the research? Do you know if anyone's tried studying that to see if there's a difference in injury?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Have you followed the research since your own doctorate and seen whether people are actually trying to study that and perhaps bring
Oh no,
research
it's
on it?
come up time and again.
Yeah.
That women are injuring themselves, and one of the ways to prevent injury is to keep estrogen on level. That's there. But now, if for whatever reason she says, I don't want to do that, I don't want to have to keep taking the pill, then somebody in athletics is going to say to her, well, it's up to you, but you do realise that your place is at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you got anybody in the room who wants to say anything? Yeah.
So I was sort of fascinated by your discussion. It's really, really, really good. I think about 2/3 of it, 3/4 of it, was about women and estrogen, and only about a quarter on men. Was that because we don't live as long, so it doesn't really matter?
It does to me. Yeah, I mean, the purpose of this evening, well, it came about when I was treating somebody who I think is a friend of yours, and we got talking about what my research was about. And so the invitation arrived and I was really delighted. I loved the idea of my discipline, if you like, being exposed to scientific communities for comment and criticism. It's very healthy. And so that's why the title of the course this evening was, and this is why you're going to spend his pension. Okay? And it was specifically to actually remind us within the scientific community of the extragenital effects. I mean, the genital effects, we know all about them, they're there, they're important, fine. But if we looked at the extragenital effects, and then we started looking at sport and all the rest of it, that brought me into the line with this current thinking about transgender. And then, you know, the male effects. One thing that I can put my name on as a discovery, if you like. There's this wonderful hormone called relaxin. Relaxin is produced by the corpus luteum, the bit in the ovary, and it's produced in every woman every month. It's not just a hormone that is there in pregnancy, okay? And it's very prevalent the day before you begin menstruation. So there's something about its function. Now, its function we know about within pregnancy is that it softens ligaments, okay? So that the pelvis can then open and the child can come down the birth canal. So we wanted to do a particular study looking at relaxin. So we did the blood sampling, we did the finger waggling, and this was a pretty sophisticated piece of kit that was designed up in Leeds, and it gave you within a degree as to where that was changing. So she might only have 10 degrees at one point and 30 degrees at another point, so it was all quite interesting. But the whole point about relaxing, why was it there outside of pregnancy? We know it's important for pregnancy, but why was it present? Nobody seemed to understand why it should be present. But with every group that you work with, you have a control group, and the control group that we looked at, bloods and ligament function, were men. Because as you rightly know, ladies, men don't change. And this was about, would you get a similar pattern? And the answer was absolutely not. Because men have no relaxin in their blood. None. But a guy in Belgium discovered that there's litres of it in your seminal fluid. So what happens is that when he ejaculates and he puts his seminal fluid against the cervix, it melts the cervix and the sperm swim through. Now, isn't that clever? Science is pretty good at that sort of, and this for me was a wow moment. Now, at the time, it was a Saturday morning, I won't forget it. I'd been looking through some electron micrograph photographs at the ultrastructure of collagen. And it appears that there are these things called fibroblasts and procollagen. Collagen is squirted in these bundles, these thick, about 100 times less thin than your human hair. And under with what we think is electromagnetism in the body, they appear to flock together in threes and wind themselves together. So then you get groups of those which wind themselves together. So you have this 1, 3, 9, 27, and you go from something 100 times less than the human hair to something which is thick enough to actually be a tendon. So wow, that's really interesting. And my son, who was about 6 at the time, I said, come on, we're going out this afternoon in nice weather. Went to Greenwich, the Naval Museum, the observatory, and we'd seen all the ships and Nelson's battle fleet and all that. As we were walking out, there was a little side exhibition, the history of rope making. So I thought, oh, let's go and have a look at that. So we walked in, and I'm looking at these exhibits, and I kid you not, I had to sit down. I came over dizzy. What the ancient Phoenicians, 1500 years before Christ, would take cotton and roll it, and then make it into threes, and collect the threes and make them into nines, to collect the nines, make them into, and they made ropes that pulled ships along. And here today, we're looking at electron micrographs. Don't tell me God wasn't a Martian, I'm sure he was. But that was just quite an astounding thing that sort of popped up out of my research. So in terms of getting back to your question about men, I unashamedly looked at this in terms of tonight as to say, well, there's all these other effects outside of the genital effects, which involve bone, which involve brain, which involve cognitive function, which involve living longer, muscle strength and when it should be done in terms of training. But by the way, the men are not out of this. They're part of it because we've all got androgens and estrogens in our blood.
I've got a sort of follow-on question to that, a more serious one, perhaps, maybe, is there basically an evolutionary reason why Jenny should get my pension?
I've got to say probably. I've got to say probably.
Grandparent nurturing, maybe, of the next generation?
Yeah.
Helping the next mothers
Certainly
out?
not for me. I'm in my 70s now, so I've done my research.
Do you have anything to say, Stephen, about estrogens in postmenopausal women, so completely after the menopause?
Well, the work here was done about 20 years ago. Somebody asked the question, why is it that women after the menopause do still suffer from these estrogen-led tumours, in particular in the breast and in the uterus? And the answer is because estrogen is not just produced from the ovary, it's also produced from the adrenal glands. And it was thought that there was a mechanism whereby after their ovaries had gone off and were quiescent, something happened to turn on this extra supply. And if it was the adrenal, then that's an important source. And all adults have this balance in their body of male and female hormones because we need the two for normal health and function. But if the seesaw starts to swing in one way or the other, then that will produce the effects that we don't want. And there are tumours, breast, as I said before, uterus, cervix, vagina. All these tumours are pushed, are fed, are sparked along by estrogen. And so why are they occurring in women much later? It's because there's been a surge for whatever reason. And that's why people were concerned at the very beginning with HRT. If someone's come up with some data that says they're not that concerned about it now, fine, I'm happy I haven't gone down that road. But
So I'll just say that there have been a few people commenting that some of the developments in HRT have included how it is given and the dose rates. So in particular, transdermal through the skin HRT using patches is a great deal safer and has wiped out those adverse effects.
yeah,
For the person on the chat who's asking, can we get that in the UK? Yes, you absolutely can. Definitely, I can guarantee that. So yes, that's something to ask a doctor about if you're in that area.
many women are now given vaginal creams. And that's a good delivery route.
Yeah, exactly. But there's also skin patches which you just wear for a few days at a time. Okay. I'm going to have a really mad off-the-wall moment here. So I was quite inspired by you thinking about the differences between men and women and wondering if there could actually be a reason rather than just, sexist jokes and things like that. Here's another thing which people make jokes about, but actually is often true. There are times of the year like this where people are going down with flus and infections, and the joke that gets made is about man flu. But it is true that there are times when infections seem to hit men harder. So it made me wonder, have you seen, or do you know of in your research, any effects on infection succumbing?
Yeah.
That could be linked to these hormones, because that could be some difference there.
The website that I subscribe to, which probably at least 4 or 5 times a week sends me notification of various different papers, is Medscape. Very, very clear. It's an American-based thing. It's very clear. And questions there were being asked about why is it that a man just doesn't get a sore throat and a headache, maybe a sniffle. He gets full-blown flu. And they're looking, oh no, they're not looking, they're posing the question that one of the things, maybe it's the woman's role in society, which says that she can't get sick, whereas his role in society says that he can. Now, I'm not going to argue that one, but it is something where people are looking and saying, what's the difference? He's going to take time off work, he's going to spend the day in bed, he's going to do this. Can she do that? It's much harder in a sense. Another is to do with the immune response, and how does that immune response trigger, and is it mediated? Well, one of the things we've seen about estrogen is it does mediate the immune response. So there's going to be a difference in that immune response, not only when you catch the bug, but also how the bug affects you.
So a higher immune response means more symptoms, you feel worse,
Well,
etc.
it means you're going to respond to whatever's attacking you.
Starting to wonder about COVID now. All these things are very interesting. Sorry, yeah.
I understand, I think I'm right here, in saying that the great number of genes for resistance of disease are on the X chromosome, of which, of course, women have 2, and men only have 1. So, strictly speaking, women should have twice the disease resistance of men.
I mean, again, if that's the case, and I know it is the case, why?
Because
Did
women are
nature-
more important. Mothers are more important.
Well, there you
Mothers
go.
are more important than fathers.
That's what I was alluding to just now.
If you wipe out the fathers, the babies will still grow up. If you wipe out the mothers, the babies will die.
Well, there's a whole new ballgame in terms of an argument for that. I mean, it's just... I don't know. There's lots and lots of examples I can think of in life that support totally what you're saying. But women die later because they're nurturing their families who aren't grown up yet, is another question mark. You know, has nature given us more estrogen and therefore more of a protective effect so that she gets to the age of being a grandmother, whereas the guys, he's done his job in 5.8 minutes and then that's it.
Take your word for that. I mean, that would beg a question of, are women starting to have the menopause later, or does the menopausal, perimenopausal period go on later?
There's all sorts of other factors. For example, I've been told by someone who worked in a women's prison at a governor level, 100% of women who are incarcerated for the first time, for their first offence, lose their period.
That must be stress, surely.
Is it stress? Is it pheromones? Is it whatever? I don't know. But they all get to the doctor and the doctor says, don't worry, give it 2 or 3 months, it'll all come back. And I found that fascinating. You know, the one place they're not going to get pregnant, hopefully, is in a prison. So therefore, turn everything off.
So I'm probably going to make this the last question, so unless anybody's got anything urgent in the room. Okay. So this is to ask you with your osteopath experience. A little bit more broadly, as you've talked a lot about, obviously, hormones, and that was the subject tonight, but generally, if you could advise just 1 or 2 things for men and women to do to minimise injury, what would it be? We've got your idea of maybe think about where you are in your cycle for the women. Okay. Is there anything similar for men?
The answer has to be, what were you doing when you hurt yourself? Seriously, that's... I was actually on... There's a programme called Gardener's Question Time. Yeah, I was actually on that a few years ago because I was treating one of the producers, and she said to me, how do people hurt themselves in the garden? And I mentioned various different things, and the next thing you know, I was on Gardener's Question Time. The fact that I actually employ a gardener has got nothing to do with it. But I suggested something called rotation gardening. And rotation gardening works. I should have patented it, right? Basically what you do is you take your phone and you set your phone for 10 minutes. You write yourself a list of jobs. Mow the lawns, do the flower beds, deadhead the roses, go and do some stuff in the potting shed. Every time it goes ping, you stop what you're doing, you do something else. Ping, stop, do something else. You're never in the same position for too long. Okay? And when you've done 1 round, you go and have a cup of tea. Okay? And for every hour in the garden, it's 10 minutes in a hot tub. Now, that's the advice which has come directly because I've seen the way people hurt themselves. You know, what did you do? Oh, I was only pulling out a tree root. Well, how big a tree root? Well, it was a 10-foot pine, you know. Oh, okay. That's the first thing. Secondly, for women, certainly for women involved in sport, I will get them to check their cycle. And between day 12 and day 14, don't go to the gym. Just leave it. Your chances of hurting yourself are reduced by a factor of 80%.
Or indeed do core stabilising exercises, which you could probably do very safely.
I would rather they did nothing. Perfectly frankly, I'd rather they did nothing. Core stabilising exercises are excellent. I recommend them to patients all day long. That's because I work with a lot of pregnant women and I get their core muscles tight as ropes, you know, so they can then push these babies out and carry them afterwards. But that's the first thing. Secondly, things like, and it's going to sound pathetic, but it's actually very true. You're going shopping, you're going to the supermarket. Why not go twice in the week and get half the amount to carry home, rather than once in the week and try and lift that stuff into the back of the car? It just makes sense. You know, I'm all about this concept of don't hurt yourself. You know, I don't like having to take your money.
I think we merge those two together, don't we? And don't go and carry your shopping on days when you've got low estrogen.
There you go.
There we go. Sorted. I'll say thank you properly in a minute, but first, just to say apologies to everybody. It was a bit short tonight, but I think it was the best way round. And this way we've had a good evening, which is great. The next one will be, I think it's Tuesday, January the 9th. We've had a bit of a glut of things that are very medical this end of the year. It won't necessarily carry on, but just to say that one's going to be the kind of last in this little series, which is Dr. Guido Ruas talking about breakthroughs in Alzheimer's treatments, which we're going to be very interesting to hear about indeed. As usual, I'll put this video out at some point, and I think that Stephen's quite happy for me to put his slides up as well on the YouTube page, and I'll probably be doing that for at least one of the others I've already posted a video for. I will be saying on the mailing list where those links are and which ones have had anything added. As usual, our thanks to Pharmacology. As usual, thanks very, very much to my lovely helpers who've done a fantastic job getting everything sorted, and we're about to clear up. Those in the room, if you're leaving, please don't press button 0 because that'll take you to the basement. It's number 1. That's the ground floor here because it's a fairly odd building. Obviously, we're going to be back in the spring at all the usual dates. The dates are already on the website. I'm filling in the names as we finalise when people are coming. I'm going to make another appeal just to people to help contribute a little bit. Thank you very much, those in the room. They're very generous for putting a bit of change in the hat. But it's not possible to completely run this, especially when I'm having to do expenses for speakers to travel, without a little bit of money. If everybody who came online was just able to put in £1 or £2 per cafe that they come to, it would really, really help. There are fixed costs associated with running this, and I'd really appreciate it. You can donate by card transaction online, and all the details are on the front page of the website, how to do that. But we'd also love to see you in person. Obviously, this is the cafe before the solstice, and then the nights start to get a little bit shorter, things will be a little bit less dark in here. It's a beautiful balcony. If it's good weather, it's amazing outside. As we get into the spring, hopefully we'll get some good weather. It'd be lovely to see more people. And suggestions are always welcome via email, etc. So, obviously the biggest thanks of all tonight to Stephen, who sat in his car on the M40 and M25 for far too long. And I really, really appreciate it, especially as he has to go back now. And if we can give him a round of applause. Thank you.